He didn't dare look at what was coming next. There was the station master's house. The station master was about to have breakfast. "Horrors!" cried Thomas, and shut his eyes. The house rocked, broken glass tinkled, plaster was everywhere.
Thomas Comes to Breakfast is a classic Thomas and Friends story. It really is one of those episodes that's unforgettable. Thomas, being overly confident, brags to Percy and Toby that he doesn't need a driver or fireman, something that Percy and Toby don't take very kindly to. But regardless of this, Thomas still looks to prove such to them. Thomas ends up waking up before Percy and Toby the next morning, and with his fire already partially started, Thomas sets off on his own, without anybody inside of his cab. At first everything is easy going, but Thomas soon realizes that he can't brake, and as he continues down the line he realizes that he's on a collision course with the station master's house, who at the time was having breakfast with his family. Thomas, being unable to stop, closes his eyes and braces for impact, and inevitably ends up running face first through the station master's window, thus ruining the family's breakfast. Thomas is scolded by not only the station master, but his wife as well, who naturally is upset that Thomas ruined her breakfast. She doesn't seem to care much about the house though, and Thomas is then pulled out by Donald and Douglas, who of course crack some jokes at him, and Thomas is then brought back to the sheds where he's scolded again by Sir Topham Hatt. There's really not a lot to the story as a whole, but nonetheless this story stands out as one of the most iconic in the Thomas and Friends series, not to mention it's somewhat of a fan favorite, and is especially one of my favorite episodes, so much so that I customized my old G-Scale Thomas to look like he was from this episode. Take the hint, Bachman, please take the hint. As most of you probably already know, this is a classic Reverend W. Awdry story, and because of this there is some real life basis behind the story itself, and the information that I was able to find for this story is to say the least intriguing. I mean, such an incident seems so perfect for Thomas and Friends. To know that such actually happened in real life is honestly kind of funny. That and how similar the episode and the actual events are actually pretty uncanny. I think after hearing what I have prepared for you guys today, I'm almost certain that you guys will be able to agree with me in saying that. So without further ado, let's get into the true and real life story of Thomas Comes to Breakfast. The locomotive that was involved in the incident itself bears a striking resemblance to Thomas, and like Thomas, this event actually comes from the LBSC Railway. The engine was an 062 Billington tank that was stationed at the New Cross shed during the 1910s. One late evening, the washout gang had been operating one of these engines, and after refilling its boiler had left its regulator slightly open. This would ultimately go unnoticed by the firelighter, and thus as consequence, the engine numbered 166 had managed enough steam to move on its own. She quietly would end up slipping off from the yard. According to the rules and regulations of the railway, the reverse lever on the locomotive should have been put in mid-gear, but by the general cursedness of things, it of course wasn't. To add insult to injury, the handbrake wasn't screwed on either. No one would actually take notice to the locomotive leaving the yard, as most would assume that it was being moved by the shed driver. The particular line that the locomotive would find itself on would follow the yard down to a hoist, under which engines would be lifted for spring adjustments and so forth. However, because of this, there were no buffer stops. Only the boundary fence, and beyond that would be the station master's house. The locomotive would push the fence out of the way with little effort, and make itself quite at home in the station master's parlor. The damage the locomotive caused to the house was so severe that it actually had to be propped up before the locomotive could be pulled out. Unfortunately, it's unknown if there was a nagging wife there to make the locomotive feel bad at the scene. How close these events are to the story that the Reverend W would write is honestly kind of shocking, but as I've said before, I really shouldn't be surprised with these true stories. I guess this was just more one that I didn't expect, and truth be told, I don't think I'll be alone in thinking such. Just like I stated before, I was honestly kind of surprised to find a true story in this episode, even though now that I know the facts, it seems pretty realistic. This episode was always one that stuck out to me as a kid, and even now as an adult it still manages to. Thomas's overall cheeky nature is displayed perfectly in this episode, and the trouble that he finds himself in is overall kind of funny too. It's also great to know that just like in the episode, in the real life events themselves nobody was actually harmed, and if you've kept up with this series you know that that's something that's not very common, so it's nice to have a good ending in some capacity. While I don't don't know what became of the engine itself. I presume that it was pulled out just like Thomas, and hopefully restored back into working order. While it might not be the most crazy or thrilling accident in Thomas and Friends, it will always remain a true classic Thomas and Friends story. It's also great to know that Mattel still appreciates this episode too, so much so that they've actually released a new Thomas Mini to encompass such. Fine, just take my fucking money. So it's definitely not something that's necessarily dead, and now neither is my mini collecting. I'm gonna have to get back on that. Great. But beyond anything, I'm happy to see these classic stories actually getting some recognition, and hopefully now you guys have a little bit more to appreciate whenever you go back and rewatch this classic episode. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.